There is something strange and mysterious about the way certain people embed themselves in our consciousness without our permission or understanding. We meet hundreds of people throughout our lives. Some we forget within minutes of the conversation ending. Others we remember vaguely as pleasant acquaintances who crossed our path briefly before moving on to their own separate journeys. Most people come and go from our awareness like waves on a shore, leaving barely a trace of their presence once they have moved past us. But then there are those rare individuals who somehow bypass all our mental filters and install themselves permanently in our thoughts, showing up uninvited at random moments throughout our days and nights, refusing to be forgotten no matter how much time passes or how much distance grows between us. These are the people whose names keep popping up in our minds when we are doing completely unrelated tasks, when we are supposed to be focused on work or chores or conversations with other people. These are the individuals we find ourselves thinking about when a song comes on the radio or when we see something funny and immediately imagine how they would react to it. These are the humans who have somehow become part of our internal landscape, part of the constant background noise of our consciousness, present even when they are physically absent. And the strangest part is that often we cannot explain why, cannot point to any specific reason or dramatic event that would justify the amount of mental real estate they occupy. This is the story of Natalie, a 29-year-old woman who found herself completely consumed by thoughts of someone she had only known for a few months. Someone who had not done anything particularly remarkable or extraordinary, yet somehow had become the most important person in her mental and emotional world, without either of them really understanding how or why it had happened. Natalie had always considered herself a rational person, someone who made decisions based on logic and careful consideration, rather than impulse or emotion. She had a stable job as a graphic designer, a nice apartment, a circle of good friends, and a generally well-organized life that made sense to her. She dated occasionally, but nothing serious had developed in years because she had high standards and was not willing to settle for relationships that felt forced or inauthentic, just for the sake of not being alone. She was comfortable with herself, content with her independence, not actively seeking anything or anyone to complete her because she did not feel incomplete. Then she met Adrian at a mutual friend's birthday party on a random Saturday evening in April. He was not someone she would have normally noticed in a crowd. He was not particularly loud or attention-seeking, not the type to dominate conversations or work to be the center of attention. He was just there, standing near the drinks table, having a quiet conversation with someone Natalie did not know. She ended up next to him when she went to refill her glass and they started talking. One of those casual party conversations that usually leads nowhere and is forgotten by the next morning. But this conversation was different somehow, though Natalie could not have explained what made it different at the time. Adrian asked her questions that went beyond surface-level small talk. Not in an intrusive way, but in a genuinely curious way that suggested he actually cared about hearing her answers. When she told him about her work as a graphic designer, he asked follow-up questions that showed he was really listening, that he wanted to understand what she did and why she loved it. When she mentioned a book she was reading, he did not just nod politely, but engaged with her thoughts about it, offering his own perspective in a way that felt like a real exchange of ideas rather than just polite conversation filler. They talked for over an hour without Natalie even noticing how much time had passed. Other people came and went from their little corner of the party, but they stayed, caught up in a conversation that ranged from silly topics to deeper ones, from jokes that made them both laugh to discussions about life and meaning and what mattered. When Adrian eventually had to leave because he had an early morning commitment, he asked for Natalie's number, not in a smooth pickup artist way, but in a genuine way that suggested he actually wanted to continue talking to her. Natalie gave him her number without hesitation, which was unusual for her because she normally guarded her contact information carefully, not wanting to deal with awkward text exchanges with people she was not really interested in. But something about Adrian felt different, felt safe and interesting and worth pursuing, even though she could not have articulated exactly what that something was. They said goodbye, and Natalie went back to the party, but her mind kept drifting back to their conversation, replaying certain moments, remembering the way he listened and responded and made her feel heard in ways that felt rare and valuable. Over the next few weeks, Natalie and Adrian started texting regularly, not in an obsessive way, not in a constant stream of messages that demanded immediate responses, but in a comfortable rhythm that felt natural to both of them. Adrian would send her a photo of something interesting he saw during his day, with a caption that made her smile. Natalie would share articles or memes that made her think of him. They had conversations that lasted hours, jumping from topic to topic without any agenda or destination, just enjoying the exchange of thoughts and ideas and stupid jokes that probably were not actually that funny, but felt hilarious because they were sharing them. They also started meeting up in person every week or so, always casual hangouts that neither of them labeled as dates, even though they felt more significant than just friendship. Coffee shops where they would sit for 3 hours without noticing the time passing. Walks through the park where they would talk about everything and nothing. Museums where they would wander through exhibits together, sometimes discussing what they were seeing, and sometimes just being comfortable in shared silence. Every time they hung out, Natalie found herself not wanting it to end, found herself disappointed when Adrian had to leave, even though she knew she would see him again soon. What confused Natalie was that nothing dramatic was happening between them. Adrian had not declared his feelings or made any grand romantic gestures. They had not kissed or crossed any physical boundaries that would clearly define what they were to each other. They were just spending time together and talking and enjoying each other's company in a way that felt easy and natural and completely free of the games or complications that usually came with getting to know someone new. By all logical standards, this should have been just a nice new friendship, pleasant but not particularly significant in the grand scheme of Natalie's life. But instead, Adrian's name kept popping up in Natalie's mind constantly, invading her thoughts at the most random moments. She would be working on a design project and suddenly think about something funny he had said the last time they hung out. She would be watching a show and imagine what Adrian would think about it, whether he would find it interesting or boring or ridiculous. She would see a headline or a meme, and her first instinct would be to send it to Adrian, because she knew he would appreciate it. His presence had somehow become woven into the fabric of her daily consciousness in a way that felt both wonderful and slightly terrifying. Natalie found herself trying to understand why Adrian was so impossible to stop thinking about. She would lie in bed at night, analyzing their interactions, trying to pinpoint what exactly it was about him that had captured her attention so completely. He was attractive, but not in an overwhelming way that would explain this level of mental preoccupation. He was funny, but she knew other funny people who did not occupy this much space in her thoughts. He was kind and thoughtful, but those qualities alone did not seem sufficient to explain why his name kept appearing in her mind, like a song she could not stop humming. The more Natalie tried to understand why Adrian was so unforgettable, so constantly present in her thoughts even when they were not together, the more she realized that perhaps there was no single reason she could point to, no specific quality or moment that would rationally explain the depth of her attachment to someone she had only known for a few months. Maybe Adrian was so stuck in her mind because he made her feel seen in ways she had not realized she was craving. When she talked to him, she did not have to edit herself or perform a certain version of who she thought she should be. She could be silly without worrying she would be judged as immature. She could be serious without worrying she was being too intense. She could be vulnerable without fearing that vulnerability would be used against her or seen as weakness. Adrian had this way of accepting whatever version of her showed up, responding to her authentic self, rather than requiring her to be anything other than what she was in that moment. Maybe Adrian was so impossible to forget because being around him felt effortless in a way that most human interaction did not. Natalie had not realized how exhausting it was to navigate most relationships, how much energy it took to maintain friendships and connections that required constant management and careful calibration. But with Adrian, everything just flowed. Silences were not awkward. Conversations did not feel forced. Plans did not require elaborate coordination or negotiation. They just existed together easily, and that ease was so rare and so precious that Natalie's mind kept returning to it, kept savoring it, kept wanting more of it. Maybe Adrian was so constantly in her thoughts because he had somehow become her person, the one she wanted to share things with first, the one whose opinion mattered more than it probably should for someone she had not known very long. When something good happened in Natalie's life, Adrian was the first person she wanted to tell. When something went wrong, he was the person she wanted to talk to about it. When she was bored or lonely or just wanted company, he was the person she thought of reaching out to. He had become her default, her go-to, her primary source of connection in ways that felt significant and scary and thrilling all at once. Natalie knew she was falling for Adrian, though neither of them had said anything explicit about what was happening between them. She could feel it in the way her heart would speed up slightly when she saw his name on her phone. She could sense it in the way she would dress a little more carefully when she knew she was going to see him, wanting to look good even though she told herself it did not matter. She could recognize it in the way she found herself thinking about future plans that included him, imagining what it would be like if this thing between them became something more official and defined. But what confused her was why these feelings had developed so strongly for someone who was not doing anything particularly designed to make her fall for him. Adrian was not pursuing her aggressively or trying to sweep her off her feet with romantic overtures. He was just being himself, showing up consistently, treating her with respect and kindness and genuine interest. And somehow that was more powerful than any grand gesture or dramatic declaration could have been. His steadiness, his authenticity, his complete lack of pretense or game playing, these were the things that had burrowed into Natalie's heart and mind and refused to leave. One evening, when they were sitting on a bench in the park watching the sunset, Natalie decided she needed to say something about what was happening, needed to acknowledge the elephant that had been growing between them for months. She was terrified of ruining what they had, scared that putting words to these feelings would somehow change the easy dynamic they had built. But she was also tired of the uncertainty, tired of not knowing if Adrian felt the same pull toward her that she felt toward him, tired of her mind being consumed by someone without knowing if that mental real estate was justified or just wishful thinking on her part. So she took a deep breath and said, "Your name keeps popping up in my head constantly, and I am trying to understand why you are so impossible to stop thinking about." Adrian turned to look at her with an expression she could not quite read, and for a horrible moment, Natalie thought she had made a terrible mistake, that she had misread everything, and was about to humiliate herself by confessing feelings that were not reciprocated. But then Adrian smiled, this soft, genuine smile that made her chest feel tight, and he said, "I was starting to think I was the only one, because your name is pretty much a permanent resident in my mind too, and I have been trying to figure out what to do about that." They both laughed, this relieved, nervous laughter that came from months of unspoken tension finally being acknowledged out loud. Adrian admitted that he had been afraid to say anything because he did not want to mess up what they had, did not want to pressure Natalie into something she might not want, did not want to lose her friendship if she did not feel the same way he felt. Natalie felt almost lightheaded with relief and happiness, realizing that all this time she had been worrying alone about feelings that were actually mutual, that Adrian had been going through the same mental gymnastics trying to understand why she had become so important to him so quickly. They talked for hours that evening, finally being honest about what had been building between them, acknowledging that whatever this was had moved well past friendship into territory that felt more significant and more scary and more right than either of them had expected. They agreed to stop dancing around it and actually try being together officially, to see where this connection could go if they stopped holding back and just let themselves feel what they were feeling. This conversation marked the moment when confusion transformed into clarity, when unspoken feelings became shared truth, when Natalie finally understood that Adrian's name kept popping up in her mind because he was meant to be there, because some people just fit into our lives in ways that feel inevitable once we stop resisting them. In the months and years that followed, Natalie would look back on that period of trying to understand why Adrian was so unforgettable, and she would realize that sometimes there is no logical explanation for why certain people matter to us the way they do. Sometimes we meet someone whose energy just aligns with ours in ways that defy rational analysis. Sometimes a person comes into our life and becomes essential to our sense of well-being, without doing anything particularly extraordinary except being genuinely themselves. Sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones that develop quietly, without drama or fireworks, just through consistent presence and authentic care and the rare gift of being truly seen and accepted by another human being. Adrian's name had kept popping up in Natalie's thoughts, because he had somehow become part of her, woven into the fabric of who she was in ways that could not be easily extracted or explained. He was not a distraction or an obsession or a fantasy she had built up in her mind. He was a real person who had shown her what real connection could feel like, who had set a new standard for what she would accept in relationships, who had proven that the right person does not require games or manipulation or exhausting effort, but instead offers the incomparable gift of simply being easy to love. The story of Natalie and Adrian is a reminder that sometimes the people who matter most to us are not the ones who make the loudest entrance or the most dramatic impression. Sometimes the most important people are the ones who just show up consistently, who listen genuinely, who accept us without requiring us to be anything other than what we are. Sometimes a name keeps popping up in our thoughts, not because of anything that person did deliberately to capture our attention, but simply because their authentic presence resonates with something deep inside us that recognizes home when it finds it. So if there is someone whose name keeps appearing in your mind, someone you cannot seem to stop thinking about, even though you cannot rationally explain why, maybe stop trying to understand it so much and just accept it as the gift that it is. Maybe they are unforgettable because they are supposed to be, because your mind and heart have recognized something your conscious brain has not caught up to yet. Maybe they keep popping up in your thoughts because they belong there, because they have become important in ways that do not require justification or explanation. Maybe the answer to why they are so impossible to forget is simply that they are worth remembering, worth thinking about, worth making space for in your life and in your heart.